Hello and welcome to Top Knot Education, where you get insight and summary into the chapter of a classic novel in under 5 minutes. Today we will be talking about J.D. Salinger's Catcher in the Rye, Chapter 9. Chapter 9 begins with Holden getting off the train in New York. He's still feeling very lonely, so he goes to use a phone booth, but he doesn't know who to call. He thinks about his brother D.B. in Hollywood, his kid sister Phoebe, his true love Jane Gallagher, and an old girlfriend Sally Hayes, or even an old classmate Carl Luce, who he doesn't like very much. These characters are important because we will meet Sally, Luce, and Phoebe in the coming chapters, but at this moment, Holden isn't satisfied with the idea of calling any of them and he leaves the phone booth. Instead, he catches a taxi to a hotel. On the ride there, he tries to connect with the taxi driver, who isn't very interested in talking. Holden asks him about the ducks in Central Park, a problem, if you remember, that was vexing him back in Chapter 2. Here's the quote. "Hey, listen," I said. "You know those ducks in the lagoon right near Central Park South, the little lake? By any chance, do you happen to know where they go, the ducks, when it gets all frozen over? Do you happen to know by any chance?" I realized it was only a 1 in a million. He turned around and looked at me like I was a madman. "What are you trying to do, bud?" he said. "Kid me?" "Oh, I was just interested, that's all." Holden doesn't get any answers from the taxi driver, and it's unclear if the driver doesn't know the answer or thinks the answer is so obvious that Holden must be kidding. I ascribe to the former because the novel is populated with characters who represent who Holden might become if he continues to refuse to educate himself. Remember, the answer is simple. Ducks fly south for the winter. On the one hand, almost everyone should know this, but on the other hand, a lot of people, Holden included, don't know. Holden will run into a number of uneducated people that are basically holding metaphorical signs which read, "This is your future if you continue to avoid being educated." When Holden gets to the hotel, he encounters another example in the busboy, who is old with gray hair, but his job is to carry Holden's luggage, which, as Holden explains, he was even more depressing than the room was. He was one of those bald guys that comb their hair all the way over from the side to cover up the baldness. I'd rather be bald than do that. Anyway, what a gorgeous job for a guy around 65 years old, carrying people's suitcases and waiting around for a tip. I suppose he wasn't too intelligent or anything, but it was terrible anyway. Holden's time in the hotel is one of the most interesting and controversial moments in the novel. Remember, this is the most banned book of all time according to public library records, and in the hotel room we can start to see why. Holden spends time looking out the window at the other people in their own rooms. He sees some interesting things. One guy is dressed completely as a woman, and he's strutting back and forth across his hotel room, elegantly smoking a cigarette. A couple is playing around by spitting water on each other's faces. Both these examples are simultaneously intriguing and disgusting to Holden. It's an appropriate reaction for a teenager accidentally stumbling onto adult sexuality, and the 50s version of a modern teenager wandering over to the dark side of the internet. He is grossed out by what he sees, but he is also somewhat turned on. He actually describes himself as horny, and he remembers that a while back he got a woman's number from a guy at a party with the promise that the woman would hook up with anyone at any time. Her name is Faith Cavendish, and he calls her up. Faith is an interesting character. She's got a heavy East Coast accent and is somewhat uneducated. There are clues that she's been working even though it's a Saturday, which by 1950s standards implies that she's in a low-income job. Holden has also called so late that he's woken her up. She begins the conversation angry, but when she hears that he's from Princeton, which is a lie, her entire demeanor changes. She begins to speak with a British accent and agrees to meet up with Holden. Even though this is what he wants, he declines to meet with her and hangs up. If one of the themes of Catcher in the Rye is socioeconomic differences, we can see them here. Faith is inconvenienced and unhappy, but she's willing to do what Holden wants because he's rich. He, meanwhile, can blow off the offer without consequence. The big question is, why does he? Here's my theory. Remember I said that girls are one of the things that might drag Holden into adulthood. We want Holden to grow up, but having sex with a poor young woman he doesn't know is not the correct path. He either senses this, or he is simply afraid to grow up in general. Either way, he turns her down. Alright, it's an important chapter in regards to themes of socioeconomics, education, and growing up. And that's how it ends. Get to class.